The rain pelted down in relentless sheets, a rhythmic drumming on the roof that seemed to echo the growing unease in 16-year-old Emily's chest. She stood at the large bay window of her family's secluded country house, staring out into the storm. The house, a sprawling Victorian manor inherited from her grandmother, sat at the edge of a dense forest. Tonight, her parents were away on a rare weekend getaway, leaving Emily alone for the first time. The old house creaked and groaned under the assault of the wind. Emily pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling of dread that had been creeping up on her since dusk. Her parents had reassured her multiple times about the security system and the sturdy locks on all the doors and windows. But something about being alone in such a large, old house on a night like this set her nerves on edge. She decided to distract herself with a movie. Settling onto the plush sofa in the living room, she flicked through the streaming service until she found a classic thriller. The opening credits rolled, and she tried to lose herself in the familiar scenes. But her attention kept drifting back to the storm outside. The wind howled, rattling the window panes, and the occasional flash of lightning illuminated the room in stark, eerie light. Halfway through the movie, Emily heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. She muted the TV, holding her breath as she strained to listen. The sound came again, a soft scraping, like fingernails on wood. Her heart pounded as she glanced around the room, trying to locate the source. It seemed to be coming from the back door. Summoning her courage, Emily tiptoed towards the kitchen, the source of the noise. She clutched a kitchen knife, feeling foolish but reassured by its weight. The back door was solid oak, with a large window that looked out onto the dark expanse of the backyard. She peered through the glass, but all she could see was the distorted reflection of her own wide-eyed face and the sheets of rain beyond. The noise stopped. Emily exhaled, wondering if it had been her imagination. Just as she turned to go back to the living room, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. She stifled a scream, gripping the knife tighter. The only light came from the occasional flash of lightning, casting ghostly shadows on the walls. She fumbled her way to the kitchen drawer where the emergency flashlight was kept. The beam cut through the darkness, offering a small measure of comfort. Emily took a few deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. It was just a power outage, she told herself. Nothing to panic about. But then she heard it again, a scraping sound, louder this time, followed by a faint tapping. It was coming from the basement. Emily's mind raced. The basement door was always locked. Her father was meticulous about it, especially since it housed the old coal furnace and a maze of cobwebbed storage rooms. Steeling herself, Emily approached the basement door. She hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. The scraping sound grew louder, more insistent. She took a deep breath and flung the door open, shining the flashlight down the narrow staircase. The beam illuminated the steep steps and the concrete floor below. Nothing seemed out of place. Emily descended slowly, the knife still in her hand. The air grew colder and damper as she went deeper, the sound of the storm muffled by the thick walls. At the bottom, she swept the flashlight around the room. The furnace loomed in the corner, its iron bulk casting long shadows. Boxes of old family belongings lined the walls, covered in dust and neglect. Emily's breath caught when the beam landed on a figure huddled in the corner, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes. She froze, the flashlight trembling in her hand. The figure didn't move, didn't seem to breathe. Gathering her courage, Emily stepped closer, the light revealing more details. It was a life-sized porcelain doll, its glass eyes staring blankly ahead. She let out a shaky laugh, feeling a mixture of relief and foolishness. Her grandmother had collected dolls, and this one must have been forgotten down here for years. She reached out to touch it, but the moment her fingers brushed the cold porcelain, the scraping sound returned, louder and more menacing. Emily whipped around, the flashlight beam darting around the room. The sound wasn't coming from the doll. It was coming from behind a locked door at the far end of the basement, a door her father had always kept bolted shut. She backed away, her mind screaming at her to flee, but her feet seemed glued to the spot. Suddenly, the door shook violently, as if something on the other side was trying to break through. Emily turned and ran up the stairs, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She slammed the basement door shut and locked it, leaning against it as if her weight could keep whatever was down there from escaping. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She fished it out with trembling hands. It was a text from her best friend, Sarah. "Hey, how's the first night alone going? You okay?" Emily's fingers fumbled as she typed a hurried reply. "Power's out. Heard weird noises. Freaking out." The response was immediate. "Want me to come over? My parents can drive me." Emily hesitated. The rational part of her knew that having someone else there would make her feel safer, but she didn't want to admit how scared she was. "Yeah, please. I'm really scared." "On my way. Hang tight." Emily's heart eased a fraction. Knowing Sarah was coming made the oppressive silence of the house a little more bearable. She stayed in the kitchen, the knife still in her hand, and waited. Minutes felt like hours, the only sounds the relentless rain and the occasional creak of the old house. Finally, she saw the headlights of a car pulling into the driveway. Emily rushed to the front door, flinging it open just as Sarah dashed through the rain to reach her. "Thank God you're here," Emily said, pulling her friend inside and locking the door behind her. Sarah shook off the rain, her eyes wide with concern. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." Emily quickly recounted the noises, the doll, and the shaking door in the basement. Sarah listened, her expression growing more serious by the minute. "Let's go check it out together," Sarah suggested, though her voice wavered slightly. Emily nodded, feeling braver with Sarah by her side. They armed themselves with kitchen knives and descended the basement stairs once more. The flashlight beam wavered as they approached the locked door at the far end. Suddenly, the door flew open with a deafening crash, and a gust of icy wind blasted through the basement. Emily and Sarah screamed, stumbling back as a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. It was tall and hunched, with elongated limbs that seemed to writhe and twist unnaturally. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow in the flashlight's beam. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as the creature advanced, its movements jerky and erratic. She and Sarah backed away, their knives useless against this nightmarish intruder. The creature let out a guttural growl, and the basement seemed to vibrate with its malevolent presence. Just as the creature was about to lunge at them, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the room, and the power surged back on. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered to life, banishing the shadows. In that moment, the creature let out a bone-chilling scream and dissolved into a cloud of black smoke, dissipating into the air. Emily and Sarah stood frozen, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The basement was silent once more, save for the hum of the furnace and the distant rumble of thunder. "What the hell was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Emily shook her head, trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. "I don't know, but it's gone now." They hurried back upstairs, locking the basement door behind them. The house felt different now. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. Emily and Sarah settled on the sofa, still clutching their knives, too shaken to speak. As they sat in silence, the storm began to wane, the rain easing to a gentle patter. The events of the night seemed almost surreal, like a fevered nightmare. But the memory of the creature's glowing eyes and the chilling sound of its growl remained etched in their minds. "Promise me we'll never talk about this again," Sarah finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded. Agreed. They stayed awake until dawn, the first light of morning bringing with it a sense of safety and relief. Emily's parents returned later that day, none the wiser about the horrors their daughter had faced. Years later, Emily would inherit the old house, but she never lived in it again. The memories of that rainy night lingered, a dark shadow over the family's history. She often wondered if the creature had been real or just a figment of their imagination, brought to life by the storm and their fear. But every time she heard the sound of rain on the roof, she couldn't help but remember the scraping, the glowing eyes, and the chilling growl. And she knew, deep down, that some nightmares were all too real